Welcome to
I
today's
want
webinar. Our speaker today is John Dowling with Service by the Boxes. Before I turn it over to John, I'd like to let those of you who are live with us know that you may submit questions during the webinar via the Q&A tab at the bottom of the screen. This webinar will also be recorded so that you may watch or rewatch on demand at your convenience. And with that, I turn it over to John.
well, thank you, Katrina, and I also want to say thank you to AED and the AED Foundation for hosting this webinar. I do believe it is important. A lot of dealerships struggle to be best in class because of silos within their dealership. So, just briefly about me, author of Service by the Boxes. It's listed at number 5. Books that's in or defining 2025 by bookauthority.com. Conference speaker, I'll be at Summit in Dallas with AD Summit, and also at ConExpo in Las Vegas in March. So just to get right into it, I want to just kind of, what we're going to talk about today is no more silos. When we don't have a siloed dealership, it means that really what we're saying, we have unified operations, which create loyal customers, accountable teams, and profitable dealerships. And so, if that's true, then the opposite is true as well, right? If you do have siloed departments, that means you don't have a unified operations. We're not creating customer loyalty. We don't have accountability, and most importantly, we don't have profitable dealerships. So when you look at dealerships today, it seems like we're busier than ever, but we don't seem to be, I would say this, we're not as profitable as we should be. And so when you think about silos, if you've ever watched the movie or read the book, The Three Musketeers, and I'm not talking about the candy bar, is they always had a saying, and the saying is one for all and all for one. And so when we're talking about getting rid of silos, we're talking about every department working together for the one dealership. And when we do this, when you have a unified team, dealership working together to support your customer, your customers will feel it, your employees will feel it, and I promise you, your P&L will also reflect that as well. Research shows that 70% of executives and customer experience leaders identify silos as the single biggest obstacle to great customer service. And so I want to say that again, 70% of executives throughout different industries say, and also customer experience leaders will say, that the number one obstacle to delivering best-in-class customer service is silos. And so I don't know if you follow me on LinkedIn or not, but feel free to connect with me there. I did a post the other day, and I said, it doesn't matter if you sell heavy equipment, if you sell parts, if you sell service hours, or you do rental, you're in the customer experience business. And so what I mean by that is that heavy equipment is becoming commoditized. And when I mean commoditized, I'm saying there's so much competition nowadays. There's so many new players in the market. 50 years ago, we had one or two major brands. Now there's this, 10, 15 brands, and it always seems to be a new manufacturer trying to get into the North America market. And so what happens when things become commoditized, we have to lower the price to be competitive, because there's always a dealer down the road who's willing to sell cheaper. And if you're thinking, I'm just here to sell equipment, or I'm here just to sell parts, we basically have a race down to the bottom. Who can lose money the fastest? And that's what happens when you have a commodity. And so if you think about bread and milk and like coffee is a commodity. It's a bean that's roasted. You grind it up, you pour hot water over it. There's not a whole lot to it. But there are certain companies out there who have turned the commodity of the coffee, that industry, upside down on its head. So like Starbucks is what I'm talking about is how can Starbucks charge 100% more than McDonald's when there is a debate, is McDonald's coffee just as good as Starbucks coffee? And some people would agree yes. But Starbucks realize it's not the coffee, it is the experience. It's the customer experience that makes the difference. And so they have sold us in the North America market that if you drink coffee from a cup with the green mermaid on it, it somehow tastes better and you are more sophisticated and you're in a different class, a higher class of consumer if you drink coffee from Starbucks. And the coffee is debatable if it's any better than the coffee that comes from McDonald's. But because Starbucks focuses on customer service and customer experience, they can charge 100% more for a cup of coffee that you can buy at McDonald's. And so that's the power of customer service. And that is the key to the main reason we want to get rid of silos is to be able to give best in class customer service because that is how we're going to differentiate our dealership from every other dealership that's out there right now because the product differentiation is no more. And I don't want to upset anybody or offend anybody, but it doesn't matter your brand of excavator. Everybody has an excavator that is similar quality, similar performance. And so we can't depend on necessarily the performance and quality. We have to differentiate ourselves by the customer service experience. And the number one enemy we have of delivering best in class customer service is siloed operations. So, as we're saying, silos equals bad customer service. And so we can't be best in class. We cannot deliver best in class customer service when we have departments that are fragmented. And so a way that to let me how we say it this way. So let's look at the symptoms that your customers see. And also think about this. When you go into a dealership, maybe to buy a car or an ATV or a boat or RV or whatever, or you go into a department store, whatever, to do business, think about this. Do you sense silos? Do you sense the tension between the different departments? And so these are things that customers see. If you have a dealership that have silos, this is what they're seeing. They have to repeat the same information over to multiple people. Nobody likes to repeat the same information over and over and over again. And so the way that this looks like is the customer calls in, they have just spent the last month or so building trust and a relationship, sharing personal information with the salesman. They get their machine. Now they have an issue. And so they call the person they know and they call the salesman and say, hey, I'm having an issue with X machine. Immediately, the salesman is like, well, that's a service issue. Let me get you service. And so they put the customer on hold and say, service line 1. The service manager answers the phone and the customer's ready to receive some helpful information about how to resolve their issue. But instead, what they get is from the service manager, I don't know who you are. I don't know what equipment you have. What is your problem? And now the customer has to repeat themselves over again and over again to get something done. That frustrates the customer. That's not best in class. And so also what a customer will see is delayed communication on the equipment status or a status of an invoice. You know, maybe they just bought a machine. They want to know when it's going to be delivered. Nobody can really tell them because the salesman or the sales department and the service department are at odds and they're fighting over turf war. They're not communicating well together. Where the person who loses is the customer. And the customer feels it. They're stressed out about it. They're saying, I just need to know when my machine is delivered. And I can tell you, that customer who has to go through that, they're not going to do business with you long term. Or you're going to have to discount your prices to a point to entice them to stay. In either way, it's not a good relationship either way. Because remember, we're for profit. We want to make money, and we don't want to give everything away just to keep our customers. And so another thing that the customers will see is when parts and service, rental and sales, they treat each customer different. They treat the customer like they belong to a particular department instead of the dealership as a whole. You know, and you can kind of see examples of this is when a customer is walking through the showroom floor, and maybe it's a parts sales rep or counter sales saying, "Hey, how can I help you?" You know, and really there to help them and engage that customer. And they're like, "Oh, I'm looking for a salesman." And they go, "Oh, you got to go over there to that department over there." And then they just walk away and leave because the parts department doesn't necessarily concern about the well-being of the sales department. And that can go either way. Once again, bad customer service, bad customer experience because departments aren't working together, they're working against each other. Um, so let's look at, we know silos equals bad customer service, but let's look at things that we may see as leaders of a dealership. What are signs or what are things that we will see in experience? One of the things is fragment communication. And we have silos, so no one's talking to anybody, but also we have different tools, we have separate data, we have a different CRM. And so everybody's tracking data. None of the departments are talking with each other. And I think one of the biggest ones is the CRM. A lot of dealerships will invest in a CRM for the sales team, but won't share that information with anybody else. And I want to bring this point out real quick that, you know, we call the sales department the whole goods department, or when we refer to the whole goods department, we refer to them as the sales department, like they are the only department in the dealership that sells. And that's a bad perception. That's not true at all because the parts department sells parts. The service department sells technician hours. The rental department sells access to equipment. And so we must realize every department in a dealership is a sales department. But you have the whole goods sales, parts sales, labor sales, and rental sales. And so we all have the same customers. We're all there to support that customer. And if we want constant communication, a CRM is a great way where everybody can share information with one another of what's going on. So the service department knows if the whole goods, see, I even caught myself. I call it the sales department because I've been brainwashed. If the whole goods department is quoting a new piece of equipment, or if they have a piece of rental equipment out on their job site, this visibility helps every department deliver best-in-class customer service. Another symptom you're going to see with silos is duplicate work. That when you have a siloed dealership, you create duplicate work. Basically, you're paying employees, multiple employees, to do the same exact job. An example, I talked to a service manager about 2 weeks ago at an extremely large dealership. And one of the frustrations that she had is she had multiple directors and VPs that would in a week's time all reach out to her to ask her to run a report, ask her about particular information that she has given to every other one. So she'll have like 4 to 5 people, executives, reach out to her for the same exact report, for the same exact information. This is siloed operations. Why won't the VPs talk with one another? Why can't they communicate together and work together? Now you have a service manager, instead of doing value added activities like best in class customer service, she's running reports and emailing it to a VP somewhere. But the VP in the next office to that VP has the information, but they're not communicating. They're not working together. They're basically protecting their turf. And so when you have this protection turf behavior, you build up walls, you build up silos. We don't communicate with one another, and we start having this constant firefighting mentality. And so if you have a siloed dealership, one of your symptoms is going to be constant firefighting, constantly babysitting different departments, trying to keep everybody happy. And it's just a constant, it just wears you out as a leader. Missed opportunities, finger pointing across departments, all symptoms of a siloed dealership. Let's look at some statistics. So PwC, a service company, estimates silo-related inefficiencies. So silo-related inefficiencies, we just discussed some of them, cost companies the equivalent of 1 day of productivity per employee per week. Another way to say this, because silos exist within dealerships and within companies as a whole, they lose 350 hours of productivity per employee per year because of silos. So if your average pay or salary or wage, say, let's just say is $50,000, you basically lose $100,000 a year on just inefficiencies because of the siloed mentality or silo culture of your dealership, because we're not working together, we're working against one another. And so let's look at root causes of silos. I think we would all agree that silos are bad and are deadly and are counterproductive. So let's look at the root cause. And I'll just be upfront with you that the root cause of silos is a failure of leadership. It is a failure of leadership. And so we're going to look at what is this failure of leadership looks like. And so short termism is when leaders are obsessed with this month's profitability, and they're ignoring the 5 to 10 year strategy. They're ignoring how this affects the culture. They're not paying any attention to customer retention. They're just saying, what can I do to hit my numbers this month? And when we have that mindset as executives or senior leaders, it just filters down and creates this very toxic culture within our dealership when we become obsessed with, I've got to hit this month's numbers. I will sacrifice the longevity of my dealership or the company or my department as long as I can hit this month's numbers. And this is has a negative impact, like I said, on your culture and also on customer retention. Ron Slee is a good friend of mine, and I guess I could consider him a mentor as well. He's been in this business since 1975, and I was born in 75, so I think he knows something about the heavy equipment world. And he constantly tells me this. He says that it's profit over people. Dealerships that struggle, dealerships, i.e., who have silos, is they're putting profit over people. And when the ownership of a dealership chases only cash, they're just concerned about the next big sell, and they're just trying to figure out, how can I make as much money today as I possibly can? How can I preserve my cash? And when that is their sole focus, and I love cash. I think cash is extremely important. Revenue is vanity and cash is king, it has been said. And so it's important to have cash. But when you're obsessed with it, and that's all you're chasing, then that creates a toxic culture within your dealership. That's gonna create the culture where employees start to protect their turf instead of working together. Because if they know, if you, as the leader, as the owner of the dealership, that all you're concerned about is who can bring in the most cash into the company right now, who can have the biggest sell, who can have the biggest win, then you're telling your different department heads and your employees that it doesn't matter at what cost to have that next big sell. I just want to see the next big sell. And when you recognize and you celebrate that big sell over long-term objectives or long-term goals, then that creates that toxic culture. And employees want to please their boss. Employees want to keep their job. Employees want to be successful. And if you, as a leader, define success as whoever has the biggest sale at whatever cost, even if it's detrimental to the long term health of the dealership, that's what they're going to do. And then you have the different departments fighting against each other because they're just trying to show their department as the most profitable, their department as the one doing the biggest and best things, trying to get your attention and your praise. Another way we could look at this or see leadership failure is no vision or bad vision. In the book of Psalms in the Bible, it says, "Without a vision, the people perish." And I've always been amazed that when you read good business books, I always think that they're Christians and they must have read the Bible because the Bible is filled full of great business knowledge and information. And so this is true here. If you don't have a big vision, if you don't have a good vision for your dealership, then you're going to struggle. Nobody's going to know what success looks like. As I was studying or preparing for this session, I learned that majority of dealership employees cannot define what success looks like. And I can tell you that that is true. I was working with a dealer a while back ago, and I surveyed all the store managers or branch managers and above. And I asked them, what is success? In the president's eyes, what does success look like for you? And no one could answer the question. The best answers that I could get, and if I kind of summarized the feedback I did get, was this: don't burn the dealership down and don't lose money. I don't know about you. That doesn't motivate me. That's not going to motivate majority of your employees, that your vision for your dealership is don't burn the place down and don't lose money. And so that's where people struggle. They have a hard time determining, like, what does success look like? What should I do? And they start to internalize everything and they start defining success for themselves. IBM found that 72% of employees don't fully understand the company strategy. That goes back to being that vision caster. As the leader, as the owner, as the executive, you should cast a big vision for your dealership, for your department, and you must ensure that everybody understands the strategy. They understand what is the end state and the goal that you're trying to achieve. So this is the results. When you do not have a vision or a bad vision, departments will start writing their own definition of success. And this is dangerous. And the reason it's dangerous is when they start trying to figure out what success is that they're going to tie it to their compensation. They're going to say, okay, don't really know what success is, but I'm getting paid. I have a compensation plan, and they will work that compensation plan. They will do everything in their power to increase their own compensation plan, even if it is harmful to the dealership, even if it's harmful to the very department, as long as they're making as much money as they possibly can, working their compensation plan, they're going to consider that success. Recognition. They're also going to pay attention. What does my boss recognize me for? What does the owner recognize? What does the owner celebrate? And if you only celebrate when people are working their compensation plan or driving for that big sell, but it's detrimental to the dealership, or maybe it's harmful to a different department, that's what they're going to define success at. They're going to define success based off their compensation plan and what will get them recognition, which is going to breed silos because they don't care about the other department. They're not concerned about the other employees. They're only going to push, how can I make as much money as possible? And how can I get recognition from the owner, from my boss, or my boss's boss, or whatever? And they're not concerned about anybody else. That's when you have a leadership vacuum and you don't have a vision, employees turn in onto themselves and they start to create their own idea of success, which is very dangerous. what silos look like in a dealership. And so this is kind of like a diagnostic checklist. If some of these things resonates with you, if some of these things like, yeah, I see that, we have that problem, then you probably have a siloed dealership. And so lack of cross department communication. If your departments are not communicating effectively, and when I say communicating, I don't mean cussing each other out and blaming each other for whatever failure that the dealership has. That's not communication. I'm talking about productive communication where they work together, they share information freely, and they work together as a cohesive team. When you lack that communication, it leads to duplicate work and miss opportunities. I know I was working with a dealership, and their warranty department um, did not trust the accounting department to account for their debits and credits, like getting credits from the manufacturer and being applied to the appropriate account or work order, because there was constant miscommunication between the two departments. They were tracking their debits and credits on Excel spreadsheets. And so when they closed the work order and they filed it and they got the credit statement back from the menu, they were tracking all that. But that's an accounting function. And so now we see accounting is tracking debits and credits. And now you have the warranty tracking debits and credit. And what happens is the dealership is paying for both of them. They're paying for all these employees to do the exact same work. Instead of getting them to work together as a team, to communicate together, to have shared responsibility and shared information, it breeds duplicate work. And when you have employees doing duplicate work, they don't have time to focus on value added activities in your dealership. If you're constantly firefighting in your dealership, if you're the owner, the president, or an executive or regional manager, and you spend majority of your day fighting fires between departments, that means you have a siloed dealership. Your dealerships aren't working together. You're playing referee, you're playing babysitter, and you're not when you firefight, you're trying to keep the peace within your departments. That ties up all your time, all of your capacity, and you only have so much time in a day. I don't care who you are. You have this 24 hours like everybody else. There's only so much mental capacity you have in a day to focus on work. And if majority of that time is spent babysitting, then you have no time for strategic planning. You have no time to not only think about the end of the month or end of the quarter, but much less, where do I want my dealership in a year, in 5 years, or 10 years? Where where do I want my department to be? Because you're spending all your time firefighting, because we have a siloed dealership, because we've allowed this toxic culture to develop within our dealership, because we're not casting a big vision and leading our people. Sales is the golden child. Now, I'm not picking on the sales department, but most dealerships, the sales department is a golden child. I work with dealers all over North America. And so I was talking with a service manager, and he said, John, he said, we're managed to the T in parts and service. Like, we can't do anything wrong, or we can't do anything without somebody calling us. We have an SOP for everything. And he says, but the sales department, it's like the wild, wild west. They can do whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want. And yet we are restrained, and we constantly have to do everything, according to the policies or procedures. And so what happens if you have a golden child department and you treat them better than anybody else and you let them do whatever they want, that undervalues your other departments. They feel undervalued. And so in the book of Proverbs, it says an offended brother is harder to be won than a walled city. So an ancient Hebrew proverb is saying, if you offend somebody, it is harder to win them over to your thinking, to your point of view, than it is to physically attack a walled city. And so what happens is when we value one department over the other, all the other departments get mad. They get upset. They get a chip on their shoulder. Now, do you think that breeds this sense of unity and let's work together? No, they don't want to work for the Golden Child Department. They don't want nothing to do with it. They start trying to protect their turf. They become in a very defensive posture of how to defend their department, how to defend their business against the Golden Child. And it just breeds this silo mentality, which is counterproductive for anything that we're trying to do. Another way you could say you have silos, and maybe this is you only have one or two voices at the executive table. When departments feel voiceless, they build walls. Walls go up. Now, this is not only for departments, but I've seen dealerships that have siloed locations. And so, what this usually looks like, the original location is the quote unquote corporate office. They've expanded out to multiple locations, but they treat all the other locations as second class citizens. They don't really have a voice. The main location, i.e., the corporate office, dictates what everybody else is going to do without any input or opinion from any other location. And it just breeds disunity. Nobody wants to work together. Nobody likes to be told what to do and how to do it without them voicing their opinion or understanding exactly why are we doing these things. So if you want to break down silos, you got to make sure everybody, that's every department and every location, has a seat at the table. They have a voice. They want to make sure that they're heard and seen. And if not, we breed silos and everybody's working against everybody. I don't know about you, but it aggravates me as a consultant to work with dealerships when their biggest competitor or the biggest roadblock is one of their very own locations and nobody works together. Everybody is sabotaging each other. Another way we have silos or breed silos or know that you have silos is that you have compensation plans and say you have a scorecard with KPIs, which is great. But if you have a department or an employee who can hit their bonus and hit all their KPIs, and yet the dealership as a whole is negatively affected, you have misaligned KPIs. You should never have KPIs or compensation plans that will allow somebody to be successful, right? To say you're successful, but it has a negative effect on your dealership. Think about how everybody, the other people feel when they're negatively affected because X VP or director or manager gets this big bonus and everything, but did it at the sacrifice of the success of everybody else. So you always need to look at your compensation plans and KPIs and see if they're aligned with your overall vision for your dealership. Just real quick indicators: interdepartment conflicts, duplicate efforts across branches, CRM is locked away in the sales department and not shared with anybody else, misaligned KPIs, customers sensing tension between departments. They sense it and they're not going to stay around. If you're pushing your different departments to upsell and cross-sell the customers when they come in, if customers don't feel secure, if they don't feel comfortable, if they don't feel welcomed, they're not going to spend money with you. They're going to come in to buy only what they need, and then they want to get the heck out of there. So if there's constantly fighting between parts and service, if they're constantly fighting between service and sales or rental and sales, if there's always conflict, your customers can feel it. We all have friends who maybe they're going through a divorce, or maybe they're having a falling out with another friend y'all have in common, and nobody likes hanging out with them, especially when they're all in the same room, because you feel that tension. When you go to your friend's house, a husband and wife, and they're fighting, Do you have a good time? Do you enjoy being there when they're constantly bickering at each other, making little comments at each other? And so too is your customer. When we can't get along at a dealership, your customers don't feel welcome. They don't feel comfortable. They feel uneasy. And when they feel that way, they're not going to spend any money with you. They're going to get exactly what they need because they have to, and then they're getting the heck out of there. So, this is extremely important. This is where you're leaking profit and leaking customers and not even realizing it. Let's look at the cost very quickly, and then we'll talk about how to fix this stuff. Lost productivity. You will lose 7 to 12 hours wasted per employee per week if you have a siloed business. Financial loss. Miss opportunities to upsell and cross sell customers because because we're just not communicating. This leads to poor absorption, wasted payroll, and it's all because we're not working together as a team. We've got to communicate and we have to work together. We don't want to fight each other. I've seen a lot of executives spend majority of their day running reports, looking at data, not to add value to the dealership, not to grow the dealership, but to protect their turf, to go into the boardroom, to meet with the owner or the president and say, look at all this data I've spent 2 weeks on to prove it's not my fault. What a waste of time. As executives, we've got to cast big visions. We have to build value, not protect our turf. And if you're in a siloed operation, that's what executives do, is they only spend time protecting their turf. Customer loss. We talked about this before, that frustration leads to churn. Like customers leave. Salesforce did a survey and they found that 70% of customers expect a connected experience and they won't tolerate anything else. This goes back to what we talked about. They don't have to repeat themselves. The customer expects, when they walk into your dealership, and the way that they're treated with the parts person and the salesperson and the service and rental, it should feel exactly the same. We shouldn't treat customers differently because they're in our dealership for a different department. It should have the same feel. That's what customers expect. That's what they want. And if you don't give it to them, they're going to go someplace else. Or you've got to discount your products and lose money. Employee loss. Silos create toxic work environments, and your top talent won't stick around for it. If you're constantly turning over talent, you may look in and see, do I have a siloed operation? Do I have a toxic work culture? And I'll say it this way. So there's lots of studies out there, and they don't really agree. But the turnover has a true dollar cost. And so some people say, if you have a $50,000 employee, it'll cost you $50,000 to replace them. Some people will say it's 2 times or 3 times that, So depending on the position and how much revenue they bring in, it's a big different number. But I would be safe to say at least double. If you have a $50,000 employee, every time you have to replace that employee, it costs you $100,000. And when we think about that, we realize how big of effect the silos have on our dealership, and we just leak profit out and we don't see it on the P&L, and we're wondering, why aren't we profitable? Why aren't we making as much money? Why are we losing customers? We may want to look at our culture, and we might want to look, do we have a siloed operation? All right, this is how we fix it. How to tear down silos, a leadership playbook. Cast a clear North Star. Cast a clear North Star. Define a dealership's vision. What I'm talking about here is we need to have a commander's intent. When I was in the Marine Corps, we had the commander's intent. And as NCOs, we made decisions based off of that commander's intent. The Secretary of War just had a big meeting a couple of weeks ago, and he was crystal clear on the North Star for the War Department. His commander's intent is that if you wouldn't be willing to send your son or your daughter into combat with your current company or unit, then fix it. And so basically what he's saying is you should want, as generals, to create an army or a navy that you would be willing or you would want your son or daughter to serve in because it has high standards. And so too with the dealership, it's all about leadership. Everything rises and falls on the shoulders of leadership. And we have to cast that clear North Star. And so this could be something like we will drive profitability by delivering best in class customer service. And the way that we know that we're delivering best in class customer service is we're going to treat every customer as if they are my parents. So think about that. We're going to be profitable by delivering best in class customer service. And we're going to ensure that we're delivering best in class customer service because we're going to treat all of our customers like they are our mother and father. You see how when you have that clear North Star, all your managers can make decisions based off of that. Would I treat my mother like this? When that female contractor or farmer comes in, how do I treat them? Am I treating them with respect? Am I treating that lady like she was my mom? If you do, then you're delivering best in class customer service. And the same thing if a man comes in, treat him with respect like your dad. It is crystal clear. And so what we're talking about today is what the Harvard Business Review calls cross-siloed leadership. And leaders must connect across boundaries. And we have to reframe relationships. We have to lead across boundaries, find connections across boundaries, and reframe relationships. I'll say this. We like to work with people who look like us, who talk like us. And so if you come up on the sales side, we naturally gravitate towards sales. If you come up from the service side, we naturally gravitate to service, and so on and so on. But if you're the leader, you've got to reframe these relationships. Those other departments are not your enemies, they're assets, and we need to treat them as such. So align goals, KPIs, and compensation. You need to redesign your compensation plans. That 10 to 30% of their compensation is tied to dealership-wide outcomes. So we want to ensure if people get their bonuses, get their commission, it's not only good for that individual employee or that department, but the dealership as a whole. We should have a shared scorecard. So if one department wins, we all win. We need to have a unified team and a unified scorecard that really tracks success and what it looks like and what do we have to do to get there. Gillian Tate, in her work, this silo effect, she's an anthropologist, PhD, but she reminds us that silos aren't just structural, they're also mindsets. And so you, as the leader, the owner, the president, the CEO, the vice president, your mindset will dictate the culture. Your mindset will determine if your dealership has silos or not. If you have a negative view on the parts department, you're naturally going to mismanage the parts department and blame them for everything. And so we really have to look internally at ourselves as leaders. We need to look in the mirror and say, do I disenfranchise any departments? Does my policies and procedures disadvantage anybody? Am I trying to prop up one department over the other? And we need to break those down. We need to change our mindset. One customer, one record. CRM is not only for the sales department, and I mean the whole goods department. Every customer facing employee should have access to the CRM, have training on it, and be updating it anytime they have interaction with the customer. Your field service technicians have a lot of trust built in with your customers, and your customers share a lot of information with them that never gets communicated to the rest of the dealership. The CRM would be a great way to share that information. Salesforce research, customers expect connected, consistent experience across every department. We need to build communication forums. I would strongly recommend building like a weekly production council where the heads of every department works together. What's our priorities for this week? What customers are we going to focus on? What machines are we going to prioritize over other machines? What things must we get done this week? Not for one department, but the dealership as a whole, to be able to deliver best in class customer service. Have a daily store level huddle. The store manager leads it and meets with all the departments and clarifies the priorities for that day. What do we need to get done today to reach our weekly goal or weekly plan of attack? We need conflict resolution training for all managers and all people. Conflict isn't bad. Conflict is healthy, but we need to know how to manage it appropriately and how to resolve it. If we don't, it becomes deadly because we build these deadly silos that destroy the dealership. Cross training and knowledge sharing. We've got to share knowledge, and we need to train managers, especially up and coming managers. Every department, they need to see how every department has a strategic fit within the dealership, and they all feed off of each other and they all support one another. Projects that get cross-functional support succeeds 76% of the time. And so basically, before you launch a new project, a new policy, a new whatever, you need to get buy-in from every department. And that will drastically increase your opportunities of success. Without all department buy-in, you drop from 76% of success to only 19%. Recognition and culture. Recognition and culture. Reward interdepartment wins, not just big sales. Find ways to reward your dealership when everybody works together. When all cylinders are firing together, that's what we need to celebrate. That's what we need to support. That's what we need to make big out of, because that's what we want. That's the long-term goal, is we have to work together as one unit. Remember, all for one and one for all. Remember this, what the CEO or the owner celebrates, that becomes culture. And so if you have a bad culture and you're the CEO and you're the owner, you need to look at yourself and be honest with yourself and say, what am I celebrating? What am I supporting? What am I making big of? And that is your culture. As the leader of the dealership, your job is to create the culture and lead it. All right, practical roadmap, 90-day sprint. I know I'm going a little long here, so I apologize for that. Hopefully all of y'all didn't fall asleep. Week 1 and 2, vision reset. Define your vision and recast it, broadcast it out to your people. Have shared KPIs, identified cross-silo connectors. And you're probably saying, John, what's a cross-silo connector? This could be systems, process, people, positions, customers that connect your departments together, that force your departments to work together as one. Identify those connectors and find a way to take advantage of them to get your people, your different departments to work together as one cohesive unit. Week 3 and 4, roll out the CRM to all customer-facing employees. Week 5 through 8, set up weekly production council meetings and daily huddles, and publish quick wins. Any wins you can get, celebrate it, make big of it. Week 9 through 12, launch cross training, rotate rising leaders, and also reward collaboration. Find those leaders, those up and coming leaders, and develop a rotational development program where they're going through all the departments so they can see what's going on. And then do a quarterly review to check your customer, your operations, and your financial matrices to see if you're heading in the right direction. Closing, call to action for leaders. Key point, if your dealership has silos, it's a leadership problem. And leadership is the solution. Breaking silos is not about software. It's about vision, accountability, and teamwork. Imagine your dealership if every department works as one. Customers are served seamlessly. Employees are engaged and retained. You don't have a lot of turnover. Absorption and profitability are maximized. Leaders, if you're a leader in the audience, you own the culture. Tear down the silos, or they will be tearing down your dealership. All right. Any questions? Sorry for going long. A lot of information. So want to give everybody plenty of time to answer any or ask any questions they may have.
John, I don't have anything in the chat yet.
Okay, perfect. That means I did a really, really good job and answered everybody's questions. Well, while we're waiting for questions, I just released my new book, What's Really Holding Your Dealership Back. And as a free gift to you, I'm giving away this book before it goes to print. You can scan this QR code and download it for free, and also a free consultation. Anybody who's on the webinar, I'll give free consultation when you discuss your dealership. Katrina, did somebody raise their hand? Did a question come in?
No questions came in, but
Oh,
Christy Griffin raised her hand.
okay. Can she engage, or does she have to type it in?
She can type it in the Q&A at the bottom.
Okay. I can't see that box, so
Got it. Nothing yet.
okay. Okay. There. She raised her hand again.
Okay, we have a question. It says, how do you suggest breaking down silos between locations?
Yeah, so that is a great question. And so I would say, like I said in when I was giving the presentation, is we got to give everybody a voice. We have to get buy-in. And so if a dealership, I would first we got to find out like what's the conflict. And so majority between locations is the one location doesn't feel like that they're being heard, or they feel like the other location gets everything, all the shared resources are all going to one location, and then you have this satellite location that doesn't get it. And so we've got to figure out, we need to listen to them, ask them, like honestly, let's ask them, hey, why why do you feel like we're not listening to you, or kind of, you got to dig down, let them tell you like exactly what is the issue. And so a lot of times is they just don't feel like they're heard. They feel like that all the support is one location and the other location doesn't get anything. And so you got to find ways to resolve that. You got to find ways to get some quick wins. You can't always give everybody what they want, but you can find something to let them win on, to give it to them. So that's one way. Find out exactly what is the issue, but also you've got to cast a big vision that we're one dealership. We're X dealership. We're not this location and this location. We're one dealership. And so you've got to look internally and saying, what are we doing as executive team, that someone would communicate that we favor one location over the other location. If you have the money and you have the resources, I've seen one dealership do this with great success, is they relocated the corporate office out of the original location. So I had a dealership that the original location was the corporate office. And as they continually expand, we realized that we basically opened up a new building, bought separate property, had a different building, and we moved corporate there. And just taking away corporate out of that original location kind of resolved that, because then everybody felt like they had an equal say so in it, because they always felt like, since corporate, the owner was officing out of that one location, they got preferential treatment. And they do, to a certain way, because it's easy to get, FaceTime with the owner. You just walk in his office, but the other locations are 2 or 3 hours away. So moving corporate out of the original location and having a standalone could be an answer. But I don't know if you're willing to spend $1 million or whatever. There's a cost to that too. So you've got to kind of balance it and kind of see exactly what's going on. Another way is, you've got to do site visits. You have to do site visits. That location, when you're just an email coming from the owner and that's all they see is this email, and they never see you, they never see the executive team, that builds silos. And you can say, hey, we're one dealership, we're all one for all and all for one. But if you never spend time with them, you never visit them, you're never there, they're not going to believe it. So did that answer your question or help? It's a pretty complex question, so I didn't want to muddy it too much.
He said yes. And we have another question. It says, how do you overcome unwillingness to buy in when folks in the organization are resistant to that process? Also, if branches are not all set up with store managers, who do we delegate responsibility to for daily huddles without creating animosity within the group?
So I'll say this. You can't be afraid to fire people. Um, Sometimes employees, key people, have just been in this culture way too long and they don't want to change it. They love firefighting. Um, a lot of managers, let me say it this way: your manager who looks busy, your manager who plays hero all the time, your manager who loves being that firefighter, putting out the fires, and really presents him or her as, if I leave, everything falls apart. That's probably your bad manager, because they're not training, they're not cultivating, they're not teaching, they're not coaching. Your manager who doesn't seem to be rattled and everything just seems to work out, and he doesn't really, that's probably your manager who's has done the hard work, that coaches and mentors. And so that's one thing we have to keep in mind when we look at these managers or whoever that is that's not buying in. I love restoring employees. I've taken great pride of working with employees that are underperforming, coaching them, mentoring them, and getting them to be successful. But we have to be wise. At some point, if they're not willing to change, if they're not willing to buy into the vision, we got to be courageous enough to just let them go find work someplace else. And I think that's where a lot of people struggle of not getting buy-in, is because these toxic people, and I'll tell you this, your toxic people are usually your highest performing people too. And so technicians, I've seen dealerships hold on to technicians that fight everything that you're trying to do, but they're really good technicians. Salespeople, my best sales guy, but he undermines everything that I do. We have to remember it's about the culture and the overall big picture, and we have to be willing to get rid of them. I think the other part of the question was, if you don't have a branch manager or a store manager at a location, who does that daily huddle? And so I don't know exactly what your structure is. I would assume you have at least a parts and service manager, maybe like a rental coordinator or a lead sales guy. And you're right. If you pick one of the other one to lead it, that can create some animosity there. But there is a natural leader there. And we need to find that natural leader. And everybody knows who that natural leader is. Either it's the parts manager, the service manager, the salesman, or whoever that is. It doesn't matter. Find who that natural leader is, and you're going to have to let them lead. We can't hold the dealership hostage because we don't want somebody to get their feelings hurt. And if an employee is going to get upset because they're not the natural leader, then maybe they shouldn't be there. But that's again casting that big vision of this is what we're trying to do. This is what we're trying to get there. We need everybody to work together on a team, and then find that natural leader and work with that as much as you can. But if employees are going to fight you because you want to be better organized and do what's right by the customer and ensure that we're as efficient as possible, and they're upset that they're not the lead guy or gal, that probably tells you about that person's character, and you probably know what needs to happen.
All right. Thanks, John. We are just about out of time. If anyone has any questions, John's contact information is on the screen. John, thank you so much for presenting today,
Yes.
and thank you to everyone for joining us today. Have a great day, everyone.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.